get your thoughts together, share them with us, and we would certainly address them over the course of this 2 hour broadcast. But we're going to pause now and take a break, and then when we come back, I will engage Mr. Richards a little bit more. And as we go along, we'll give you the cue when we will open the line. So please sit tight, make your notes, and be ready to share your questions and table your concerns with us when I give you the cue. Thank you so much for listening to The Movement.
I don't want to hear that same song again. If I hear the same song, I might go insane. Because since I small, the same thing I'm hearing. That I would have a better day coming. But anyhow that I look around, oh yeah, oh yeah. I see the whole world heading for destruction. Oh yeah, oh yeah. People committing crimes and for their escape. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Say they're doing all that for the children's sake. Better days are coming. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Better days are coming. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Children, stop your crying. Workers on strike, all workers don't cool. So your children can't get bus to go to school. The electric people cannot agree. So no light, so your child to cram for GC. Because two big man can't sit down like man. Oh yeah, oh yeah. And try to resolve a situation. Oh yeah, oh yeah. The power hungry look they carry on. Any little children as born. Better days are coming.
Welcome back to The Movement. And as we trail off on the tail end of that song, Better Days Are Coming, this is exactly what the political leader of the People's Action Movement, Honorable Sean Richards, has come to share with you this morning. His vision, his insights, well, I guess his party's as well as the CCM's vision of the better days that they are creating, the plans that they would roll out for those better days. So in his opening remarks, if you were paying attention, very early in his opening remarks, the Honorable Sean Richards said that over his years in politics, his intention really was to improve the lives of the proud and fearless constituents of Sandy Point and Fig Tree, and the citizens of St. Kitts and Nevis in general. Now, I want to ask Mr. Richards, tell me some of those ways that you can point to that are unchallengeable, that you made sure that you achieved this very improvement in the lives of your constituents.
Thank you, Laverne. There are several ways in which I have been able to improve the lives of my constituents, that is the people of Sandy Point and Fig Tree. You have had a number of developments in the constituency. You have roads which were left unpaved ever since I have known myself growing up in Sandy Point, which have been able to get paved. For example, you have the road in the Downing Street area, which we refer to as the Ponyard. Mm-hmm. You are from Sandy Point.
I am a Sandy Point.
In Sandy Point, so certainly you would be familiar with some of these areas. You have the road over in the Romney Grounds area. Those were also paved. You would be familiar with the Carpat area.
That's
that area of the Carpat, exactly, where you have persons like King Socrates residing. That is a road also which had been unpaved ever since I have known myself. Additionally, you have had some other roads paved. You have had the Roland Hill area. You have roads in the project up in Crab Hill, and you also had the paving of the road in one of the recently built projects up in the Stadium View area. The police station in Sandy Point, which had the government-owned building, which had been taken out of commission for perhaps the last 25 to 30 years, we finally have a brand new police station in Sandy Point. It is the biggest and best police station in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. We have had several improvements.
But is it just a police station, or there are other institutions that are housing that?
A very good question. You have the branch of the Magistrate Court, which is housed there. You have fire services being housed there, and also an office for customs officers at that particular institution.
So it's literally convenience for Sandy Pointers.
Very, very much so. In terms of other developments, we have had renovations and repairs to both the primary and the secondary school. As a matter of fact, the TVET space in particular at the Charles E. Mill Secondary Sandy Point High has been upgraded to provide more TVET offerings to the students attending that institution. We also had classrooms in which we had to change the entire roof because it was recognized that those roofs were bat infested, and this was affecting both students and teachers. So you have had significant upgrades to both institutions. We have been able to provide a number of persons with houses, some built on land provided by the government, and others built on land which the persons had already owned. And you had perhaps close to 100 persons who have been the beneficiaries of that particular program. You have persons who have been assisted with employment, and that is a significant number of persons. You had the recent Island Main Road project, which saw the changing out in particular of the water lines in Sandy Point, asbestos pipe, which had been there for close to 30 years. As part of that project, you had several sidewalks being installed from the Cleverly Hill area right over to the Crab Hill area of Sandy Point. So basically from one end of Sandy Point to the next end of Sandy Point. So we have had quite a number of improvements in terms of persons being uplifted in terms of the infrastructure being developed in a Sandy Point. When you look at the sporting facilities, for example, you had the play field, which had been there for more than 25 years, which received lighting for the very first time when I became the Minister of Government with responsibility for sports. You had tennis courts were added, you had a children play area added, you had playhouse added, you had bars being added to accommodate be the schools or whoever else utilizing that particular facility. The netball court was completely resurfaced. The basketball court was completely redone. You had bleachers added. You had changing rooms added. You had toilet facilities being added to the hard court. You had the pool and the rims being completely changed so that you now have glass backboards and an adjustable rim to accommodate children of any particular age. So we have had quite a bit of development taking place in the Sandy Point community.
Well, so it seems, and I'm sure that that is just the list that is on the top of your head, your memory. I'm sure that there were many more things that you would have achieved. But yet, the funny thing about politics is that you can never satisfy everybody. And the other thing, too, is that we have become maybe too accustomed to a system where if you are not part of the party who holds a seat of government, you really don't benefit. I'm not sure that that is a philosophy that can be sustained, because it clearly does no good for a small country. And I'm sure that some of those things that you just itemized, everybody benefited. Because obviously everybody has access to the areas of basketball and all of the sporting complex and whatever was fixed. The roads would have brought access. I would have heard people call into radio stations saying that they have to change their curtains ever so often because of
Yes.
dust. And so access and that sort of convenience would have benefited everybody. Now the question is, was it enough? Can you do more? Is there still things that you need to do? What are your constituents currently telling you that they expect to see you do and keep the promise for this new term? Share with us what are some of these things that Sandy Pointers can look forward to once you get into government before the year's ended.
Certainly. There is still a number of things which need to be done, and there will always be things to be done in any constituency. To go back to what you said earlier, indeed, the past practice of an entire constituency being neglected because that constituency doesn't have a representative in government must come to an end. I have consistently said that you can't develop a nation when you exclude some of the persons from the developmental process. I do believe that all of us indeed have a role to play in terms of our development. We bring different skills, we bring different experiences, etc., to the table, and if we're able to harness the potential of all persons, the country benefits as a result of it. Now, yes, there's still roads, for example, to be paved in the Sandy Point community. If you take the farms housing development, you still have quite a number of roads in that community which need to be paved. We need a bypass road in Sandy Point because we have certain areas of Sandy Point. If you have a traffic accident, for example, it is difficult for you to maneuver your way in and out of Sandy Point. I strongly believe that in terms of attracting more investment to the Sandy Point community, that is also very much needed. You attract more investment, I think local persons will benefit in terms of job, in terms of becoming entrepreneurs, etc. We had discussed when I was the Minister of Education an auditorium for the secondary school. That auditorium would be a multi-purpose auditorium so that the students can do so many other things, especially as you look at the development of the arts, the creative skills of our students. That is very much needed. We need to look at a new school for the preschool and nursery. The preschool in particular has been there since about 1983, 84, and it really now, has outgrown the intended number of students, etc., when it was originally conceived. In the Fig Tree community, you have a number of bars now being developed. And so in terms of that particular development, I had already commissioned an estimate to get some bathroom showers facilities installed in that particular area. So that is still very much a priority for me. And also to see how more persons who have an interest in that type of business establishment can be accommodated in that particular area, and how the area generally can be outfitted so that it is conducive to the development of that type of business. You still have a large number of persons who are in need of housing, and so that must be addressed. I don't think the government is ever able to meet the demands for housing in this country. So when you begin to look at the Sandy Point community, we still have quite a lot of things to accomplish. Again, when I was at education, we spoke about a TVET center being built in Sandy Point. We recognize that you have a number of young persons who have graduated from secondary school, and these young persons have not been able to advance themselves because they graduated with basically maybe with 1, 2 no subjects. But those persons, of course, have the potential to develop technical skills. And so that idea was conceived to provide training for those persons in a skill area of their choice. I've also looked at several different organizations, associations that can be put together to look at different aspects of the development of Sandy Point. Local sort of sporting association to more or less, whether it is different leagues, etc., to come together to organize those. And so as we continue to progress as a constituency, I continue to engage with the persons in the Sandy Point community because what is done must be driven by the needs of the people of the community.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I guess that is just, some of the things that you can share now. But I've seen discussions on social media where people are saying, for instance, that, Sandy Point needs to go back to its glory days, to the robust, business enterprises. We had a customs facility once in Sandy Point. We had, certain other facilities that you would not have to come to Bastille to get. And so I think there's almost a hunger for Sandy Point to be restored to those days. And I feel confident that we're going to get there. And especially, when you hopefully rise to the seat of Prime Minister in St. Kitts and Nevis. But it's not about all Sandy Point and your constituency, because there also has to be a discussion about national interests and national opportunities. So I want to ask you, you mentioned in your remarks this whole thing about political inclusion. What does the politics of inclusion look like to you? Against the backdrop, for instance, that I was monitoring a live event from your party recently, and the president of the Association of Persons Living with Disabilities, and I think they're sometimes called the differently abled people, he posted on the chat that he wanted an opportunity to share his association's vision with any government going forward. He actually intimated that he had been trying many times and he had not been able to get an audience. And so if you're talking about the politics of inclusion, how would your government, how would your future government include people like, those who are differently abled? We also have to address the young people in terms of opportunities. You mentioned also about being able to lift up young people, about creating opportunities that would give them upward mobility in the society. And so, if you're to talk about the politics of inclusion, paint a broad picture of how this would possibly look from your eyes. It may not be fully developed now, but just give us a broad picture of how this politics of inclusion looks from where you sit.
Okay. For me, politics of inclusion ensures that all persons are given an opportunity and all persons are given a seat at the table to be able to partake and to give up their ideas in terms of the development of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. I have spoken to some of these in some of the pronouncements that I have made. For example, as you ask about young persons, we have said that we will make a fund available to young persons so that they can access grants to start their own businesses. Again, that is about inclusion because we recognize that more young persons must be given that opportunity to develop their dreams. Many of us, we have that dream, but what we lack is the resources to develop those dreams. And so that is why this particular fund will be made available to persons so that if they have a business idea, they can access the fund to actually develop that business idea. As part of that business idea, we would also make some other resources available to those persons to assist them with accounting, to assist them with management to assist them with some of the other skill sets that they may lack in terms of becoming entrepreneurs. Some of us, we may have the idea, but in terms of having some of the other skill sets, resources, we lack those resources. I have spoken about the Rastafarian community and making land and other resources available to assist that community with building a temple whereby they are able to go and perform their different worship sessions. Again, that is about that politics of inclusion. As we look at our boards, I think we need to become more inclusive in terms of the persons sitting on boards. We need to ensure you have young persons, for example, on every single board that we have. As we speak about inclusion, one of the complaints that we have had from Nevis is that about the sharing of funds from the citizenship by investment program, ensuring that Nevisians receive their fair share of that money. Again, that is about the politics of inclusion. The politics of inclusion means bringing an end to the victimization which continues to rear its ugly head. It means that every single petition and Nevisian must be given a fair opportunity regardless of which political party that individual supports. You spoke about the differently abled, and I think it was when we were at our town hall meeting in Newtown Simaco parking lot just last week, Monday. I took the opportunity to speak to opportunities for the differently abled. They must be given the opportunities to get scholarships just like anyone else. Because you have a disability doesn't mean in terms of your ability to go off and to pursue studies that you are not able to do so. I said that the labor laws must be looked at to ensure that there is no victimization and discrimination against these individuals. We need to look at our institutions and ensure that going forward that these are places that can accommodate persons who have disabilities. I remember, I think it was back in 2002, I had a fractured leg. I worked at TDC then, and I know how difficult it was to be using crutches and having to climb stairs. And so these are things when you yourself have those particular experiences.
And they're just temporary.
Exactly, and right. I mean, in my case, it was for just about a 6-week period. But imagine someone who has to live with a disability for his or her life and the challenges that those persons face. So we need to look at our society and see how our society, how our institutions are more accommodative of those persons. I recall in 2015 when we won the government, there is a young man from Bay who is wheelchair bound, and his mother had reached out to me in terms of assisting him with employment. I had spoken to the then Minister of Social Security, the late Vance Amry, in terms of that. One of the challenges is that while Social Security was quite willing to hire the young man, one of the challenges that Social Security faced is how to get him from the stairs, etc. Now, and here is Social Security. I think, well, Social Security has an elevator. I don't know if it was there at the time. Okay. But, I mean, here is Social Security, an institution that, I mean, is supposed to be there to serve the needs of everyone, and Social Security itself is experiencing this particular challenge. So these are some of the things that I've said we need to look at and ensure that we have that better society to include all persons.
Well, thank you for that very in-depth response. I note in particular you said that everybody deserves a seat at the table. Because too often we think, well, politicians think that they know what people need, and there's not necessarily an engagement to understand their needs. And so I hope that before we get into writing manifestos and all of that, that there is an opportunity for young people, the differently able, the Rastafarians, the whoever, whichever group, whichever sector in society, to have the opportunity to sit down with you as the government, well, the government in waiting, if I could put it that way, so that you could hear it from them. I don't believe we get it right sometimes because we think we know what these groups want without engaging them. But the other thing to that is that sometimes we engage them and don't even implement one thing that they share with us. And if we are going to talk about inclusiveness right now, we really ought to embrace everybody, every group. So I certainly hope that that is part of your party's plan, and your sister party's plan is the same, to have a forum where all of these people, we call them, perhaps more, because I don't think this is exhaustive, so that they have the opportunity to share with you and truly feel like they're part of the land of their birth. So I thank you very much for that comprehensive response. So,
let me add here, and it is also one of the reasons why we held those series of town hall meetings in every single constituency, to get to hear from persons as to what they would like to see it be done differently, for them to be able to hear their concerns.
Fantastic. That's been quite a mouthful. So we're going to take a little break now, give you something to chew on. I advise you to make your notes. I told you it was going to be a lot of information, but we want to include your thoughts, your questions, your concerns as we go along. And as I said, we will give it a cue when we reach to that stage. But we're going to take a short break now, and we'll come right back with more conversation on the movement. We're talking today with the political leader of the People's Action Movement, Honorable Sean Richards. We'll be back after this short break.
The views and opinions expressed on this program were solely those of the caller and do not reflect the views of WinFM 98.9. WinFM reserves the right to disconnect any caller who infringes the law or offends the right of any person. The station will also refuse to take any call from any person who, in WinFM's considered opinion, is likely to expose the station to liability for statements made on the air.
I don't want to hear that same song again. If I hear the same song, I might go insane. Because it's a small, the same thing I'm hearing. That now it have a better day coming. But anyhow that I look around, I see the whole world heading for destruction. People committing crimes and for their escape.
Welcome back to the movement. This is the very first in a series of discussions, engagements, if you will, that have been organized by the People's Action Movement. Obviously, unless you're living under a rock, we know that elections are imminent. And so this is one of the means by which the party is providing you access to its leader, its candidates, and perhaps the movers and shakers of the party, so that as we reach to that stage, your views, your opinions, your questions would be incorporated into the master plan of the People's Action Movement going forward. My name is Laverne Keynes. I'm your host for today, and sharing the space for the next hour and perhaps 10 minutes is the political leader of the People's Action Movement, Honorable Sean Richards. So we are breaking down a little bit the remarks that he presented earlier. And one of the things that he said, not for the first time, was the whole, if you will, the I guess something that caused him and his party members a little bit of disquiet, in that he shared that these 15 homes that were donated to the government were all allocated in one constituency, fairly or unfairly so. But I want to ask you, Honorable, Sean Richards, if you were to have made the decision about the allocation of these 15 homes, if you were then the Prime Minister, how would you have dealt with a matter like that?
Let me say that in the first instance, I do believe that all the constituencies should have benefited from the 15 homes. I would also like to add that it is the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. And so even if it is that you were going to give one per constituency, at least that should have been done. I know in constituency number 5, for example, that 2 persons were earmarked to receive assistance through that particular program, and none of those persons received any of the homes because, as I said, all 15 were built in the constituency of the Prime Minister.
But Mr. Richards, I want to ask you, so there was a discussion. There were gifts. These 15 houses, there were gifts. So obviously there was a discussion about, how they were going to be.
There wasn't any such discussion as to where the houses are to be built. The Prime Minister never came to Cabinet.
The 2 persons in your constituency that you were thinking would have been, good beneficiaries for them. And I take it that they're free? These homes are free? So there's no mortgage, no payment at all for them?
There is absolutely no mortgage for those homes. So, yes, we had some discussions after the hurricane as to persons in different areas who were severely affected. And the agreement was that these persons would be assisted. However, in terms of the 15 homes which were built, there wasn't any discussion with the members of Cabinet on those homes and where those homes are to be built. It seems as though there was some private discussion between the Prime Minister and the relevant persons for Venezuela.
So I may as well segue into some of the hard questions. Was this kind of activity the beginning of the breakdown of the relationship, you think?
It certainly was part of the breakdown of the relationship. Persons ask a question, for example, where you haven't been able to do more things in some of the other constituencies. It is not for want of doing other things in some of the other constituencies, but you have had a Prime Minister who has been all about himself. And especially when you have ministries such as sustainable development, where you control land, you control the PAP program, when you have the Ministry of Finance, where you control the money, where you have human resources, where you control the employment of persons, when you have the STEP program, which caters for persons who are unemployed. These are some of the injustices that you had taking place. We have from time to time asked about the allocation of resources to assist us in doing things in our constituencies. And basically, you don't get the support. You got to budget estimates, for example, and you speak to recurrent expenditure. And it is only when it is time to debate the budget you see what has been approved in terms of the capital projects for the various ministries. I remember, for example, the Honorable Lindsey Grant coming to Cabinet and saying, for example, that he has the equipment, he has identified, land, he has a container to build a music studio in constituency number 4. He did not get the necessary financial support to proceed with it, and so that idea was basically stalled there and then. So it is many issues like that that we have been fighting against. It is also when some 3 times we attempted to meet with the Prime Minister to have a conversation on these issues. We said to him that in terms of the allocation of portfolios, we need to relook it because quite clearly you are using the portfolios which you have allocated to you at the disadvantage of the other constituencies.
I was going to ask you about that, about the power of negotiating, about the fact that you had the numbers that could broker a deal or not make a deal. Did you, in hindsight, think that you did not fully utilize the power of your numbers, having 4?
I do believe, there's nothing that is perfect, and so we could have done a better job at that. I can recall, for example, that after the elections of 2020, we said to him that perhaps it is time now for someone else to have the Ministry of Finance, and his excuse was that because we're in the midst of COVID and the challenges associated with it, that perhaps it's not best at this particular point in time for that ministry to change hands.
And the discussion went away after that.
The discussion went away after that, but when we went back to him within recent times, that discussion resurfaced.
Okay. I want to ask you another question again. As you share the story about the principal, and your perhaps your orders to place the principal back in the schoolroom, in the classroom. How did you personally seek to influence these sorts of decisions that went against your own political and personal conscience?
I said to the Prime Minister, for example, relative to those particular decisions in cabinet in front of everyone, that I am not going to do those things. I would have said to him that if you want those things done, then perhaps you can wait until I'm off island and the next minister is acting and see if you can get the next minister to do it. But I personally will not do it because those things were against my conscience. I cannot look at a principal who is performing and put that principal back into a classroom to teach because that particular principal isn't a supporter of you. I can say to you that in one case, the principal ended up as an education officer because I wasn't going to put that principal back into a classroom. Not me.
So you stood your ground in terms of your own conscience, your own personal conviction.
Yes.
Politics must be, I don't know, it seems as if it's such a weighty thing. I follow a certain Caribbean politician on social media, and as I was reading some of the comments from the posts that the politician made, one person said in the thread that the danger about politics in the Caribbean is that there's a certain kind of codependency. And so he was basically admonishing the politician to be very mindful, to go the route of teaching people how to fish as opposed to giving them a fish, right? And sometimes people don't need a fish until they could catch themselves. But in terms of that general philosophy, you are in pursuit of prime ministership. How do you intend to tackle things like these?
Unfortunately, it's a culture which has creeped in. It is not going to be easy to change, but I think as you create more and more opportunities for persons that become less dependent on the politicians for the things that they need to survive. Therefore, we need to develop that type of society where you give persons more opportunities to make them independent, whether it is in terms of the education system and ensuring that more persons are educated. And this is something I even started when I was Minister of Education, that no child should basically be told that the child has to leave school at the age of 16, but all students should be given the opportunity to go on to fifth form and to sit subjects. It might only be one, it might only be 2 or 3, but at least that child has something to start with. And I think it shows, if you go back to the whole concept of inclusion and respect, it shows that you're trying to include more persons. You have respect for them. You recognize that all of us, we have the ability to learn. just that some may graduate at a later stage than others, but give them the opportunity to be able to earn subjects when they leave school. So yes, I think as you develop a society where you have more and more persons becoming independent, they begin to wean themselves from that dependency syndrome that we have seen.
You're right. And in fact, you could even have gone back to your earlier submission about the grant funding opportunity that you are thinking of rolling out for the benefit of young people. Because clearly, I think we have the wherewithal to do a lot of things, but some of us just need a push. Some of us just need encouragement. We just need an opportunity to. And sometimes that crack in the door can be provided by government policies, by government training. And surely my own, as a citizen of this country, I really would like to see more equity in the resources of government being utilized to ensure that, you know, we all have an equal chance to live comfortably. You know, one still drives around with 10 kids and see people living in deplorable conditions. I don't know how much of this maybe, you know, catches the sight of our politicians, of even of our ministers of government. But surely there needs to be some more zeroing in on these types of conditions that our people are living in, and especially against the backdrop of a thriving CBI program. And so I want to even segue here now and insert my own personal view. I believe, hopefully as an upstanding citizen of this country, that a CBI program that is doing well should really have the opportunity to touch more people's lives. And here's what my own humble, unresearched thought is leading me to share on this. So we look at electricity and the rising cost of fossil fuel. Well, actually fluctuating because it's high now, but there was a time before and it was fairly reasonable. And so with all of the sun, I mean, the sun is rising now like 5:30. Why couldn't there have been, or why isn't there a plan to, because maybe there is and I just don't know about it, a plan to do a solar project or something that could harness the energy from the sun and get it into the homes of our people at a rate that is much more reasonable. Because the cost of electricity now is almost like house rent. So that if people are renting properties or maybe paying mortgages, they have to find two substantial portions of money to pay their mortgage and to pay their electricity bills. And so, as I said, in my own unresearched thought, I don't know if this is something that was ever considered, that people, the fisherman, the farmer, the drain sweeper, everybody should find a way, everybody should have the opportunity to benefit in that way. I don't know what your thoughts are.
I do agree with you. I do believe that in terms of the proceeds from CBI, we need to relook how those proceeds are being spent and to ensure that in terms of more sustainable projects that we can depend upon to improve the lives of persons and projects which to also to some extent, because you will have that component of social programs. Those would always be needed to benefit.
But they don't reach everybody.
Unfortunately, and that is part of the victimization that we have complained about, because you have so many persons out there who are not benefiting from some of these programs, but these persons are quite eligible to be beneficiaries of the programs. You have the roofing program, for example, which was part of the CBI program. And I recall when we launched that program, I had said in cabinet when it was indicated how that particular program was seeing some success. That this is the intention of the program, and we must ensure that the persons out there are able to benefit from it, because that is what we went out and raised those monies to do. To be a bit more specific, though, as we begin to look at CBI, yes, what are some of the other ways in which more persons can benefit under the umbrella of the CBI program, so that when persons look back at it, that all persons can be satisfied that they have been beneficiaries of that particular program. That is why I said, for example, the funding for young persons, that is one way in which we can utilize some of those funds to ensure that more persons are able to benefit from the program. Now, the solar farm, yes, there is a solar farm project. Unfortunately, it is not locally owned, but it is owned by foreign investors. The implementation of the solar farm has been plagued by different issues. I can say to you that the owners have come back to the government on several different occasions to ask for additional concessions from the government to get certain aspects of the agreement change. And so those have plagued the implementation of that particular solar farm. It's supposed to be located there on the Kim Collins Highway. We had the groundbreaking ceremony. I think it could have been back in 2020. But I think some good steps forward have been made with regards to it. I don't have the time to go into some of the issues which have plagued it, some of the many things which the owners of that solar farm have come back to cabinet to ask for. Some of the concessions that they want Skellig to give, some of the agreements that they want the government to make, etc.
Okay, thank you. At least we're getting close to a solution, and hopefully, I think the country is going to depend on you now to make sure that something happens. I mean, you have had a front row seat, and you've actually been part and parcel of some of these conversations and negotiations, and so having had that benefit, I think the whole country now, and having said that, is now going to rely on you to make sure it happens.
Yes, the matter has been back to the cabinet perhaps some 2 to 3 times since the initial agreement was signed. So when I became the minister, I had to go back to cabinet because of some of the terms that they wanted to renegotiate, and I know within the last month or so, the AG in particular had taken back some issues to the cabinet relative to the sublease that they wanted to do to a different company, some guarantees that they wanted between the government and Skellig to provide, etc.
So it's a work in progress. We could fairly say that it's a work in progress.
Yes.
And there's room for these things to be ironed out eventually. So it's a start.
And hopefully in the best interest of the people of the St. Kitts and Nevis, because some of what they were asking for, I can say I personally did not agree to.
There you go. And it's a good time now to segue into another kind of related question. We have and just to assure people that we're going to open the lines at 11:15. So hang tight, and get your notes and your questions ready. We don't want any lengthy commentaries before the question. We want your questions to be sharp, concise, and to the point. And remember, the questions are not supposed to be contemptuous nor disrespectful. Those are the ground rules. They're basic and they're easy. But Honorable Leader of the People's Action Movement, we have a whole wealth of resources in our people in diaspora. Do we ever think of tapping into some of these people in terms of the ability to offer some of these things to maybe form companies and come back and invest? I nothing would please me more than to hear one day that even a project of this magnitude is undertaken by our own people. I mean, even if I don't keep their first or second generation Kittitians, but it would be a thing of pride to see our own people take the leap in investing in projects of those nature, so that at the end of the day, we have a pride. We could probably, inspire people in maybe at a lower level to do things like these, as opposed to just allowing them to people who are just not our own people. So is there a plan to incorporate or to find a way to reach out to our diaspora citizens and divisions to invest in projects like these?
Yes, indeed, there is. And as we develop our manifesto, we are looking at some of the ideas as to how we can get more of our own people to come back home and to invest. I must say that I know one of the concerns that you have by some persons is that of the health care facilities that we have and the services which are being offered. And so we continue to say to persons that healthcare is indeed critical, and we will ensure that as a government we invest more in healthcare, so that some of those services that persons would have to go overseas to access, those services can be accessed right here in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. We have persons, for example, who have reached out to us about cardiologists and those other types of services being offered by the hospital. So these are some of the services that we will look at. We may not be able to offer everything, but I think we need to take a critical look at those particular services where we have quite a number of our citizens going off island to access that service, and how we can begin to phase in some of those services at our health institutions. Yes, we will come up with a program whereby we are able to attract more of our own people to invest in the Federation, rather than having those persons living overseas, investing overseas. A component of that is also looking at our young persons who go off to study. How can we ensure that they are better able to access financing at better rates from the Development Bank in particular? And how can we get as many of them to return home to invest in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis? Too often we have young persons who go off to study, and because of the interest rates that they have to pay to the bank, and they have to start repaying the loans even as they are out there studying, they begin to look at jobs overseas, and as far as they're concerned, these jobs are paying them far better than they would earn here. And so they opt not to return to the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. It's a part of it is also looking at retaining our brain power, so that you don't have that problem of them going overseas, and then you have to put the policies and the programs in place to get them to come back and to invest in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis.
Thank you very much for that. Right on cue. And I'm sure that there are listeners in the diaspora who would perhaps want to engage you when we open the line in a few seconds. And so it's good that we're closing for now on that topic, so that there is the sense that everybody is involved. I think when you're building a country, and when you want a country to progress, you really have to include everybody in that plan. And so I want to thank you for emphasizing the fact that that would be addressed in your upcoming manifesto. So we're going to take a short break now, just for a few seconds, to catch our breath and to allow our listeners to finalize their notes and their questions, so that when we come back, we'll open the line. The number is, could you help me with the number, Trent? 466-0989 or 662-0989 or 762-0989. So those are all of the local options. And I believe there's the international numbers as well, which I'll get for you in a little while. But we'll come right back after this, and we await your calls for the next 45 minutes as we wind down the very first edition of The Movement, a program organized by the People's Action Movement on its way to the seat of government. Thank you so much for listening so far.
The views and opinions expressed on this program were solely those of the caller and do not reflect the views of WinFM 98.9. WinFM reserves the right to disconnect any caller who infringes the law or offends the right of any person. The station will also refuse to take any call from any person who in WinFM's considered opinion is likely to expose the station to liability for statements made on the air.
I don't want to hear that same song again.
So welcome back. This is The Movement. If you have just tuned in and wondering what is going on WinFM today, this is the first in a series of engagements that the People's Action Movement wishes to use to give you access to its candidates. And we have kicked off this morning series with the leader, the political leader of the People's Action Movement, Honorable Sean Richards. You have heard quite a range of issues and topics that he has delved into following his opening remarks. And so we're going to use the next 45 minutes for you to engage him, share with him this particular activity, this particular series has no color. It is for everybody who wants to make the input. There are just two rules. Your language should not be disrespectful, nor should it be filled with contempt. And so when you're ready, we're here waiting for you. Ask your questions, share your concerns, whatever it is you want to have your political leader know, please do so. In fact, we have one call now, and I say a very special welcome to our very first caller to the movement. Could you share your question, please, or your concern?
Good morning to you and good morning to Mr. Sean Richards.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
I'm very disappointed. Very, very disappointed listening to this program. I'm going to be honest with you, my lady. You're a full lady. You're somebody I look up to. You're somebody I look up to highly. And listening to Sean Richards sitting down there, after what happened to the last 7 years to these people of this country, including during the COVID, Sean, including using my ID at the airport. And no apology, nothing. Sean, you said the other day, you were speaking about the Island Main Road. You said, let us talk about the pier. Sean, we need answers for what happened with all the Federation money. Because I think this thing is a joke. You just come telling us to put you back in power, Sean. You said you failed, Mr. Sean Richards. And instead, I expect the question should be from this beautiful lady, what happened to the country cash? What happened to this money over here Patsy's talking about? You, Sean, said, what about the Island Main Road? Let us talk. Sean, what do you know?
So what really is the question? So what is it? What is the question to the political leader? You say that you want him to answer the question about what happened to the monies?
Need answered what happened to the pier, what happened to the Island Main Road.
Thank you.
Sean went on to say the other day, he buy land. It's kind of point. I want to know if you buy the land during your time in government or you buy the land during on the Labour time. My friend, the country needs answers about all the injustice that went on for the past 7 years.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. We got you. Answers for the P and Island Main Road. Thank you ever so kindly. You've made history today, incidentally, by being the first caller on the movement. We welcome all views and we thank you, sir. Is there another caller? So there's no more caller. I guess, there's one more caller. So we'll hear from that caller now. Good morning and welcome to the movement.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Miss Margarita. Good morning, my honorable representative. This is Theodore Brown of Sandy Point. Now, a question. With the European Union is threatening these islands about the CBI program. What do you have in place to counteract what the European countries are doing? And if they so follow through with what they are doing, how will St. Kitts and Nevis benefit? What program will be in place to make sure that we do not go down the drain? That is one. The other thing is that as we are approaching our 40th anniversary of independence, I think it is the time now for us to speak about a republic. Forget the monarchy, let us have a local person as the head of state and change all these British names around and let us put our local names. Thank you very much.
Thank you very kindly for that, for those submissions. There are no more callers now, so we can perhaps tune these for a while. So, Mr. Richards, there's a question, there's a call about monies for the pier and the Island Main Road. I don't, pardon me, there's a caller? Okay, so let's take, so we're gonna take a call now, and so that we don't get all of the questions lost in the mess, we're gonna take this question now, and then we would allow Mr. Richards a moment to answer, to address all of them. So welcome, caller. Thank you for calling the movement.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
I'd like to congratulate you all on this program. Question to the political leader. What will be PAM focus on retraining the workforce? My reason for asking that, I think we spend about almost 60 million on the STEP program. But yet at the end of the day, I ain't see one new mason, one new carpenter, one new tiler. I ain't see no skilled person coming out of that program. And I think if we have to prepare our people for the jobs that are to come in the future, I think now is the time to concentrate on retraining our workforce. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Most excellent question. Thank you. I knew you all were going to be sharp this morning. So, Mr. Minister, I'm sorry. So, Mr. Richards, we have a couple of questions for you to tackle. So, perhaps you could start off with the first caller and his allegation about P and Island Main Road monies. Then we have the second caller who wants you to respond to the threat of the CBI program and what the European Union is saying now, insofar as perhaps giving a timeline by which I guess they want to see it phased out, and what is the fallback option of your government, and the whole idea of becoming a republic with the 40th anniversary of our independence in another year, and then the latter question about focusing on retraining the workforce, given that after all of these monies have been expended, he's saying that you still can't find a skilled tradesman. So, in any order.
Thanks, Laverne, and thanks to those persons who have called with those questions. With regards to the Island Main Road and the cruise ship pier, those, I suppose he is referring to some comments I made at a town hall meeting that we had in Sandy Point last week, Thursday. I specifically said then that for those persons who want to have a debate about those particular matters, please feel free to let us engage in that debate or those debates. To Prince, Mr. Brown from Sandy Point, who asked about the European Union threatening to close the CBI program and what programs will be put in place. We have contemplated a number of programs to be put in place because we recognize that we need to diversify our economy. Agriculture, for example, must become one of our priorities. Rather than having to import just about everything that we eat, we need to reduce our food import bill by about 40% and also begin to export food so that we get revenue from agriculture. We have spoken about, for example, ensuring that we're able to attract other universities We have Ross University, we have UHMS. We need to attract more of those universities. We have spoken about developing other aspects of the tourism industry. When we begin to look at education tourism, which I just mentioned, when we begin to look at sports tourism, we need to look at the marijuana industry and develop that particular industry, build out that industry so that we're able to reap some of the benefits of the marijuana industry here in St. Kitts and Nevis. I have spoken about information technology, that particular sector, and how we need to ensure that in terms of that sector, that we begin to develop it. And so rather than becoming the consumers of innovation, that we start to develop innovations here in St. Kitts and Nevis. We start to develop technology that we can sell to other persons. I think part of that question also hinges on the last question in terms of retraining the workforce, because if we're able to retrain more persons, then we have more persons being able to become involved in having their own businesses and having those skill sets that the caller spoke of. Earlier, when I gave my remarks relative to Sandy Point, I said that one of the ideas is to have a TVET center in Sandy Point. And we actually had spoken to the Taiwanese when I was Minister of Education about building some of these TVET centers at different locations throughout the island, so that some of the very same persons that the caller is referring to can go to those centers and be trained in some of these skills, whether it is the skilled masons that he's speaking about, but electricians, plumbers, so many other areas. We need, for example, to do an audit to determine where we are now, where we are going as a federation, and what are some of the skill sets that would be critically needed to take us to where we want to be, or when we get there, what are some of the skill sets that we would need in order to retain us and move us forward and begin to train our persons in those particular fields. I think it was Prince who also mentioned we're approaching 40 years as an independent nation, and I have indeed spoken to the fact that one of the things I want to pursue in government is moving St. Kitts and Nevis towards a republic, just as has been recently done in Barbados, Trinidad, Dominica, etc. So that, yes, we have a president and someone, Kitishana Arnie Vision, serving as president and representing us rather than having the monarchy as that ultimate head of state.
Thank you. I hope the people who posed those questions, the callers, found satisfaction in your responses. Are there any more callers? There's a caller who's waiting now, and so we say welcome to the movement. Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome to the movement.
Good morning.
I have two questions I would like to ask you. What are the reasons for us not to have the universal health care insurance that we have been hearing about for the last 7 years or even more? The other question is, what can you do when you get in office to reduce the high cost of students' loan from the development bank? Because as you mentioned, that a number of persons are not returning because of the high rate of interest and so forth and so on. And because of that, we are having a brain drain in our country. Please answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those questions. Do we have another caller? We'll take another caller. Good morning and welcome to the movement. I think that person has gone. Is there another one? Okay, since we are pressed for time and we're going to maximize every second we have on the show, so I'm going to allow... Okay, there's another caller. Good morning. Welcome to the movement.
Sean, good morning again. Mr. Richard, you have not answered the question. The country need to know who messed up the pier, what happened to the money, where the road, and where did you buy your land
Did you buy the land when you say you pay for your house in Sunny Point, or you pay it, on the Labour or on the Unity? Please answer the question.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much for your question. The funny thing about these programs is that you probably won't get all the answers you need, either because of time or because of the nature of these questions. But I thank you very much for your insistence. There's another caller nonetheless. Good morning and welcome to the movement.
Good day to you and your guests. You may not have heard the program that preceded this morning on the station, but the host made an observation basically saying that too many programs, etc., depend on the personal intervention of the ministers, as opposed to them setting up the program and allowing citizens to access them in a structured and fair way. You know, not having to be a friend or family or supporter or anything like that to benefit. In other words, we have fostered a culture of dependence.
Yeah, I don't know if you were listening, right? But that question was raised. But yes, go right ahead.
What I want to know is, can we expect a difference in governance style from the past? And so that, as you, Lavon, mentioned earlier, give everybody an equal shot. Secondly, it's all well and good to talk about roads and playing fields, etc. But these are things that any self-respecting government should be providing for its citizens. Right? That is so 1980s. What about the big-ticket items like jobs and businesses, things that make people less dependent on government handouts? I mean, I taught at Sandy Point for 3 years, a long time ago. And that area has so much history and potential and well-educated people. It should have been much further ahead when compared to other areas in the country. Okay? And Mr. Richards, you've been there for so many years. I think that you have precious little to show for it. And third, I must refer to the current situation. I know you said you don't want anything contentious. I don't know how you become a leader and not deal with contentious issues.
Who said that,
but
Mr. McMahon? We said contemptuous.
Did you say
contempt.
Contentious?
Yes. I didn't say contentious, I said contemptuous. Contempt.
As in contempt. Contemptuous.
Yes,
okay.
Yes, sir.
My bad. Sorry about that.
That's okay. You're my friend.
Yeah. But what I wanted to know is, how do you have a $250,000 project under your charge, in the ministry under your charge, and not know about it? Right? I mean, that's strange, right? And you know, I'm talking about the infamous hut, right? How could that happen? I mean, aren't you accountable for your ministry, right? And you know, this excuse that you made, for instance, with telling the Prime Minister to wait until you go away to effect changes which you yourself deem obnoxious, is not good enough. We expected much more pushback, and you know, it suggests weakness. And finally, having been bitten by what has happened over the last couple of months, what do you think is needed to prevent crises like this from happening again? You know, from a prime minister misusing and abusing power and authority and state resources. Okay, is it constitutional reform, electoral reform, or implementing a good governance agenda, like integrity in public life and freedom of information and those things? Or is it vetting our candidates and make sure to prevent the type of, shall we call them misfeasance that you all accuse each other of? I mean, that's unacceptable for representatives. So what do you think is necessary to avoid things like these in the future, including the resource sharing difficulties that we have with Nevis? Okay, then.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate those questions. We're going to take one more, but we don't want them to get lost. So after this one, we'll certainly have Mr. Richards address the person's gone. Okay, so we have quite a number of questions to address. And I see you're making your own notes, but let me just recapture them for you. There's a question about universal health care. There's the one about what we can do to reduce the high cost of student loans and thus, you know, our students not choosing to come back to St. Kitts and Nevis. The last caller spoke now about the need for a difference in governance style. He says he was asking the question, how could you not know what is happening under one of your ministries? And then I think his latter point had to do with what is needed to prevent what he described as a crisis like this from happening in the future. All yours.
Thank you. With regards to universal health care, that matter came to cabinet quite a few times. Is someone from the University of the West Indies had been commissioned to study that particular policy, and I, to the best of my knowledge, also had a staff being hired to look into it. I know, for example, that Azila Clark was one of the key persons in terms of that particular program, and so it is still being looked at, and it is the intention to ensure that universal health care actually comes to fruition for the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. There are, of course, a number of things which would have to be put in place. You have to look at the funding of it, etc. You have to ensure that in terms of the health institutions, the pharmacies, all of the necessary policies are put in place so that when it is rolled out, persons can actually say that indeed it has been well thought out. If you take the United States, for example, where President Obama instituted a similar type of program, we know that you have had quite a number of issues with that, and so it is these issues that you want to avoid, so that it really takes time to put it in place. On the question of what can be done to reduce the high cost of interest rates for student loans, I have already given a commitment that under a government of real unity, we will reduce the interest rates for student loans, and we will also look at those students who are currently paying the bank towards reducing the interest rates that they are paying, so that they begin to pay less monthly in terms of the repayments for their student loans. My land was purchased on the Team Unity. I hope that satisfies that particular call, and certainly as a citizen of this federation, I'm free to purchase land, be it under any particular administration, and I paid the fair market price for the land. To Mr. McMahon, who asked the question as to the interference of ministers of government in programs, I agree with him. I remember in one meeting that I had with the Prime Minister, and I spoke about the inability of persons to get on the PAP program. He asked me why I didn't come to him with the names. And I said to the Prime Minister that I should not have to come to you with names to get on the PAP program. The PAP program has a particular procedure as to how persons apply. I've indicated to the persons what is the procedure. The persons have followed the procedure, and as such, if the persons are eligible to be on the program, the persons should be placed on the program, and not that you have a minister interfering in the process. So I do agree with him that you need less of that interference in these particular programs. That is why you have persons working in the various ministries and departments. You set out the policies, you set out the procedures. That is also why you have an audit department, because the audit department of government should be able to go and audit these particular programs to ensure that the policies and the procedures are being followed. So you need those checks and balances. What about the big ticket items he asked, such as jobs, etc.? And indeed, I have spoken about some of these big ticket items in terms of persons being able to get jobs. I've spoken about training for persons. I've spoken about more persons coming back home, etc. He commented that Sandy Point should be further ahead in terms of the development of a Sandy Point. And indeed, what I would say to him is that Sandy Point could have been further ahead if Sandy Point wasn't neglected under the former administration. When I became the representative in 2004 until 2015, many of the things that I referenced, I have been speaking about in Parliament over and over again, and asking the then government to address those particular concerns. The playfield became almost a chorus for me. Year after year, put lights on the playfield so that the young people in Sandy Point could be able to benefit from the use of the play field.
But he seemed to have been discounting those things. He said that those things are not passe. Those things are not, 21st century kind of stuff that people want.
Yes.
How do you counter that?
You counter that because you have young persons who want to develop their sporting skills, their athletic skills, etc., and they could not utilize the field, especially persons who worked until 5, 6 o'clock by the time they got home, and no opportunity to develop those skills, because the development of an individual is far more than just having a job. Persons have different interests. Okay, and if it is that some of these things had been done, then of course the resources could have been channeled to do so many other things. So you take the play field, which for 20 or more years had no lights on it, and so you keep asking them to put lights on it, nothing. Young persons in Sandy Point asking about tennis courts. You keep saying to the government, you have young persons in Sandy Point asking about tennis courts. Build the tennis courts for the persons, nothing happening. You have persons in Sandy Point reaching out to the government for jobs, can't get jobs, because as far as they're concerned, they're from Sandy Point and you don't support me. And so you've had to deal with those things. The police station, that's something I spoke about year after year after year after year, especially at a time when crime was at its highest in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. We had become known as the murder capital of the world. And again, not one finger lifted in terms of building the new police station in Sandy Point. Some of the roads that I reference, I remember one year during the budget debate, a former minister of roads, Asa Martin, said to me that the roads over in Romney Ground, Consi Mitcham had some development over there, the Consi Mitcham putting the roads over there. And I had to say to him that no, the government allocated land to persons over there, and so the government has the responsibility to put in the roads over there. And so if some of these things had been done, those monies, as I said, could have been channeled into other aspects of the development of Sandy Point. I am not aware of any building costing $250,000. Perhaps he's referring to the security building at Port Zante. I have maintained that neither the board or management had brought it to my attention. And so you see how you could basically have that lapse in communication. And so since then, when I was the minister, I spoke to them as to how that can be improved upon. We don't live in a perfect world, and that is what happened. But it seems as though some persons may have preferred that I come and indicate to the public that I'm aware of something when I was simply not aware of it. In terms of a push back to the PM relative to some of the persons we spoke about in the teaching profession, I think I made it abundantly clear that I said to the Prime Minister, I will not be part of it. I will not be partial to those things. I would not be doing those things. Yes, I did say to him that maybe when I'm off island, you could get somebody else to do it. Because, of course...
The caller seemed to think that that was cowardice.
That wasn't cowardice, because I clearly said I am not going to do it. And I did not do it. Cowardice would have been if I had catapulted to his demands and did what he asked of me. But of course, sometimes when you are away, somebody else who is acting may not be able to stand up to the might of the Prime Minister, and that person might have done his bidding. But I made it abundantly clear that I wasn't going to be doing those things, and I didn't. So, misuse by the Prime Minister of power. And I think there are several ways that we need to look at in terms of bringing that to a minimum. And he made a mention of some of the specific ways in which those things can be handled. We need to look at constitutional reform and the power of the office of the Prime Minister. We need to, the public itself has a role to play, be it the media, be it the public in terms of making certain demands when things go wrong, that look, this is not where we would have put someone into that particular seat. And so whether it is you're going to speak about them via the media, whether it is you're going to write about them, whether it is you're going to protest, whether it is you're going to move your member of parliament to perhaps bring a private member's bill to address some of the concerns so that you put legislation in place to deal with some of these issues. These are some of the ways in which we can address these things. You also have some constitutional relief which aren't exactly being used as they ought to. The Public Accounts Committee. How do you ensure that the Public Accounts Committee is effectively utilized so that you hold persons more accountable, you hold the government more accountable in terms of what it does?
Was it ever operationalized?
It has been. The current leader of the opposition has expressed some concerns relative to some particular regulations which were put in place to govern the operations of that committee. But it is there. I mean, questions in Parliament. Those are some of the ways, I think, in which we need to hold not just
people
the
are
Prime
taking
Minister,
notes,
but persons more accountable.
And remember, they're going to use them against you.
Certainly, and I have absolutely no issue with that.
You're schooling them now.
Yes. Yes.
Do we have any more callers? No? Just to remind,
yes, we do.
Just one. Okay. Hello and welcome to the movement.
Good morning, Miss Keynes and Mr. Richards. How are you both?
We're both fine. God has been good, if I may answer for him.
Thank you, and indeed you are correct, Lavon. I'm blessed.
Okay. Well, yeah, very interesting program from Mr. Richards. About a week ago, there was a call-in program with a high official, and there's a lady who called in and mentioned that this is all things personal to Mr. Richards, that Mr. Richards had missed 91 cabinet meetings, and there's telling the person that this Mr. Richards should have been fired a long time ago. Maybe you can speak to that missing of 91 cabinet meetings, for one. It sounds as though ministers only go to cabinet. That's the only work that they do. The other thing is, though, recently again, there have been a lot of accusations made against Mr. Richards pertaining to benefits from the Urban Development Corporation and that kind of thing. I don't know if you can speak to that, because some of them do sound a bit far-fetched. So maybe you can enlighten.
You can be more specific? Can you be more specific in terms of the accusations, any of those accusations?
Some of the amounts of money paid to for booths at the park, for CPL and things of that nature. Maybe you can address that. And I can't remember the other one that came to mind, but it slipped me, I get a little nervous when you're on the radio. But you might remember another one. But I'll listen out for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any more callers, Trent? Say any more? No? Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Richard. As I said, time is of the essence, so we can just delve right into those concerns in the meantime. Okay. Missing cabinet meet 91. There's a record keeper. Somebody keeps the record at the door.
I have not missed 91 meetings of a cabinet. Yes, I took a decision not to attend cabinet meetings. Now, let me educate the public. Cabinet meetings are normally held on Mondays. So that it was only on the days of cabinet I would not have attended the meetings of cabinet. However, I would have been in my office working on behalf of the people on those very same Mondays. And every day that I was expected to be at the office, I was in my office working. As a matter of fact, I was the administrator for the cabinet chat. And so when I heard the particular accusation, I said, well, in the first instance, I have not missed 91 meetings of cabinet because you have not had 91 Mondays during that particular period. Mm-hmm. We have 52 weeks in a year.
So the 2 years you haven't gone.
So it is ridiculous to say I haven't attended cabinet for 91 days. And even as I went back to the cabinet chat, I want to remind persons that one of the issues that we have had is that when the Prime Minister is absent for whatever reason, no cabinet meetings can be held. And when I went back to the cabinet chat, during that period, there were at least 3 Mondays when no cabinet meetings were held.
So that's 88 you missed then.
So, I mean, if you had, let's say, 7, 8 Mondays, you subtract 3 from that, you're talking about 5 meetings of the cabinet.
Okay.
And as I said, on those days, I made sure I was in my office. When you look back, for example, I mean, to give persons, I mean, some of the references that I can make, we had World Water Week. I was at the church service when the students came. I was there interacting with the students when they came to visit the water department. So
it was on the day of cabinet, a Monday? It was on a Monday?
I'm not quite sure.
Okay. But you're saying, you're making the point that you were still working?
I was still working.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, we honored some persons who had retired from the ministry. That was held on a Saturday evening. I was most present. We had a webinar sponsored by the Taiwanese looking at some aspects of renewable energy, etc. I was there. I gave opening remarks. So this 91 days, again, it is Timothy Harris out there giving the public this wrong impression, lying to the public that I have been absent from cabinet for 91 days. We have 52 weeks in a year. Cabinet is normally held on Mondays, so I don't know how he calculated that 91 days.
Well, you've debunked that now, so I guess they'll give you a check mark under that column now.
So you have that. The other question that I think the caller reference is some statements being made relative to UDC and $100,000 being spent on a private box for Sean Richards. In the first instance, I'm speaking to legal counsel about that particular matter because Sean Richards had no private box for his CPL. Secondly, when the Honorable General Powell came to Cabinet relative to CPL and CPL offering to have all 33 games, I think, in St. Kitts, the Cabinet began to look at the financing of CPL. When CPL is held, the government has to pay a particular amount to the owners of the CPL to have the games here. The Cabinet took a decision that instead of the government itself, the central government itself, the federal government, having to find all of the money to have the games hosted here, that let us approach perhaps some private companies and also some of the state corporations to assist with paying for the CPL. It was suggested, for example, Social Security, Tourism Authority, SCELEC, UDC, because these are some of the state-owned corporations. Mm-hmm. It was agreed by SCELEC's board to fund CPL to the extent of $200,000. So SCELEC should have paid $200,000.
This is a cash outlay?
Cash outlay. Mm-hmm. They would pay to government, and government in turn would pass it along to the owners so that the amount that government itself would be reduced. And this was discussed at Cabinet. This was a Cabinet decision. So you had that. Now, rather than having UDC also make a similar contribution towards the hosting of the game, in exchange for SCELEC providing sponsorship, SCELEC was given a box. So the box basically belonged to SCELEC and UDC. And again, rather than SCELEC now having to find money to provide for the accommodations for the box, the catering for the box, UDC picked up the accommodations for the box. The $100,000 which was referenced, that was the budgeted amount, the estimated amount that UDC had in respect of the box. My information is that UDC only spent $60-something thousand in respect of the accommodations for the box. And the minister ought to know better in terms of the difference between what is estimated, the difference between what is actually spent. This is also a minister who comes to cabinet, and if it is one thing she does, is takes her own notes in cabinet. So she very well knows that the cabinet took a decision in terms of the state corporations assisting with the sponsorship for CPL. I did not have any personal box. The majority of the tickets for the box, they went to UDC and they went to Skelec. So you had staff, you had directors, you had members of management, etc., who would have benefited from attending the games because of the sponsorship provided by those two entities. As a matter of fact, I understand that it is a similar arrangement being looked at again this year in terms of bringing CPL to St. Kitts. Some accusations were also made about the managing director, the chairman of the board, and the CEO having credit cards. What is wrong? What is new about a director and management having credit cards? I worked at TDC. I left TDC in 2012. When I worked at TDC, directors had credit cards, managers had credit cards. It is one thing to come and say they have credit cards, but tell the public whether or not the cards were abused. If the cards were abused, then that is a different point. I would also wish to add that in terms of the cards, reference was made to the FinSec having a credit card with a limit of $10,000. Again, that's nonsense. What is the relevance of that? Because you can't make the very same comparisons with the financial secretary and some of these statutory corporations. The financial secretary, if you look in the estimates, perhaps makes a salary of about $9,000 per month. When you look at some of these statutory corporations, they make $15,000 and $20,000 and $20-something thousand a month. But let us go a little further. Skelec has a corporate credit card with a limit of $100,000. I think the manager there and the financial controller, they are the persons who have access to the credit card at Skelec, $100,000. The third point that I want to make is that, interestingly, when UDC applied for those credit cards, the person who signed the application is Calvin Esdell, who was then the chairman of the board. Calvin Esdell has been returned by the same minister as the chairman of the board. So if something was done incorrectly by Calvin Esdell, by signing the application for the credit card, why you have now brought back the same Calvin Esdell as the chairperson for UDC? It's just propaganda, all meant to mislead the public and to make the public think that there is some sort of impropriety. The building which was referenced, I have spoken about that more than once, even again here this morning. So I dismiss those.
Mr. Richards, you want to take 90 seconds because clearly we're out of time. We don't have any more time for not even another call, not even a call from heaven. So if you take a couple of seconds now to just wind up and to perhaps give a foretaste, if you will, if you know who the next presenter would be or if you're going to come back again. But surely for me, I am totally grateful for this opportunity to facilitate the conversation. And as you rightly said in your opening remarks, this is giving people access to you. All of the things that have been said, all the things that have been that have gone unanswered, this is as good a forum to have them addressed and hear from you in person. And so I want to thank you very much for being the first person in the hot seat. I think you batted well against the spin because West Indians can't play spin. We could play fast bowling, right, Trent? So I think you batted well against the sprint. I want to commend the party for utilizing this forum to give all and sundry access to its candidates. I hope that as we move forward in this program called The Movement, we move away from all of the animosity and the hatred and all of these things that don't serve us well in politics. I'm not a politician. I have no interest in being a politician. But as a citizen in St. Kitts and Nevis, I don't think that I ought to be passive at a time when our country is really going through some political trauma. I want to thank you and give it a final word.
Thank you. And before I actually wrap up, because indeed persons are listening, and so someone just took the opportunity to remind me that ever since we have had CPL here, the Prime Minister has had a private box at CPL. The Prime Minister has had a box. The government pays for the expenses for that box. The Governor General has had a box. The government pays for the expenses of that box. When I was Minister of Sports, the Ministry of Sports had a box. The ministry paid for the expenses of the box.
So it was a standard courtesy.
Exactly. St. Kitts Tourism Authority has had a box. Who carries the expenses for it? And you have different persons who are invited to come and to, view the game in the box, and so you cater for the box.
I understand how that works.
Exactly. So, you're not, to come to the public with this, is really a joke. This is really the best that you can do as a minister. You give the people, a break. People are more intelligent than this. And so I am really disappointed that the minister would come and make those accusations. But again, as I said, I am seeking legal redress on that particular matter because I had no private box at CPL. I want to thank all of the persons who tuned in to this radio program, The Movement. I am indeed happy that I had the opportunity to be the first guest. I have always said that as a parliamentary representative, and certainly when I was a minister of government, I relished the opportunity to be able to speak to the public because in so many different ways, you're able to give information to the public. You're able to receive information from the public. You're here to serve people, and it is part of serving people. You know what it is they're thinking. You know what it is they would like to see be done differently. Even so much as you're going to get criticisms from persons, you grow from those criticisms. Because criticism is meant to help you to improve on what it is you are doing or what it is you are not doing. I said to the people of St. Kitts and Nevis that the People's Action Movement has their interest at heart. We, in a real way, want to bring an end to a lot of the victimization that you're seeing. We want to ensure that the persons who are supposed to be the beneficiaries of these programs, that they become the beneficiaries of these programs. We want to ensure that each citizen is ensured of a fair opportunity and a fair share, especially in this, the land of their birth. We want to usher in your government where more persons get opportunities. We spoke about that climate of inclusion, the Rastafarians, the differently abled, giving our students who go overseas to study a better chance to come back home and to live comfortably and to be able to do so many other things. That is a society that we want to create. We want a society that becomes more sustainable, and so in terms of making agriculture a priority, we want to develop that. We want to ensure that the health care that we offer to our people, that it is better so they're able to access more services. And of course, I spoke to the universal health insurance, which would make more of our people be able to afford the medical services that they have to access. We want to put programs in place for the elderly, because that is a vulnerable sector of the society, and we need to ensure that they too are included in terms of our students, our young persons, the TVET programs, the TVET centers, so that we can retool and retrain some of those persons who may have left school without any sort of skill set, they get the opportunity to do so. As I said, we need to build a society where all of us can contribute towards the development of that society. The People's Action Movement from since 1965 has said, putting people first, and for us, that is what putting people first is all about. Again, I want to thank all of the persons for listening. I want to thank all of the callers for their calls. I want to thank WinFM for hosting us. And Lavon, indeed, you have been an excellent host of this program. And so I want to thank you for agreeing to be the host. I look forward to seeing you again. I'm not quite certain if it's going to be myself or someone else on the show next week, Tuesday. But whoever it is, I know you will continue to do an excellent job. Thank you.
My absolute delight and pleasure. Thank you very much. Have a good day, everyone. We'll see you again next Tuesday on another edition of The Movement. Until then, stay safe, stay well.
The views and opinions expressed on this program were solely those of the caller and do not reflect the views of WinFM 98.9. WinFM reserves the right to disconnect any caller who infringes the law or offends the right of any person. The station will also